Joining us now is Robert Ray. He's a former White House independent counsel and special prosecutor, also CNN legal analyst Paige Pate and Laura Coates. Okay, here we go again, another night. And Robert, I have to ask you, CNN confirmed that the FBI Director James Comey wrote in this memo, and you're looking at the article from the New York Times that came out first. Is the president guilty of obstruction of justice if this is true?
Well, the part about if this is true, I mean, the New York Times headline, which I guess will be in tomorrow's paper, says that the president asked him to end the Flynn investigation, which is not what the quotations apparently from Jim Comey's memo
Let's
say.
Put up the quotation. The quotation says, "I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, to letting Flynn go. I hope you can see your way clear to letting this go, letting Flynn go." Mr. Trump told Mr. Comey, according to the memo, "He is a good guy. I hope you can let it go."
I mean, I concede the obvious, which is that the optics aren't great, but expressions of hope and intimations do not equal corrupt intent if we're talking about trying to prove obstruction of justice. I mean, that, you know, that's a big leap.
Okay, do you think he's trying to influence him?
Well, I think, you know, you can also pass it off. If I just fired the guy, okay, enough is enough already. I hope you can see your way to kind of like just let this go.
Robert.
No, well, you can laugh.
Come on, Robert.
But that, you know, the people are throwing around obstruction of justice as if...
Robert, if I'm your boss and I said to you, Robert, listen, he's a good guy, he's my friend, I hope you can let this go. What do you think I mean?
Well, obviously, if you, I mean, people seem to think that if they have Jim Comey on the stand before the Congress under oath, that he's going to admit that this constitutes obstruction of justice. I have news for you. I think that's very unlikely to happen.
So you don't think the President of the United States was trying to influence Comey at all?
I think he was trying to measure and gauge him. And I think
in order to what end?
In order to find out, you know, what the sense of the person he was doing. Remember, this is early on.
Hang on. Hold on.
We're in January.
The sense of the person for what reason?
The sense of the course of an investigation, which he has every right to find out. He's the executive branch.
He should know about an investigation. He needs to know the details of an investigation that involves him as well.
He didn't ask the details.
But that's what you just said. I'm just following your line of...
He was trying to make an assessment of who it is he was dealing with. And by the same token, by the same measure, Jim Comey did the same thing. Okay. And Jim Comey, as a result of that, did what it is he should have done. One, he documented what happened. Two, he didn't disclose it to the investigators, which is to say his job was to protect the investigation, which is apparently what he did. And three, he did so potentially at the price of his own job, which is ultimately what happened.
Laura, what do you think? Do you see where I'm going with this? Is that...
It is. I mean, this is kind of why people hate attorneys, right? Because we tend to say things and parse words and use defenses that can often belie common sense. Not to suggest that he doesn't know what he's talking about, but this is why people are very skeptical about the credibility of attorneys who protect different entities and organizations. What we have here is not yet risen to the complete criminal level of obstruction, but you certainly do have the intimations and the influence and the contextual clues that can get you there. Remember, the most important thing here to think about is two things. Number one, at this discussion, at this meeting, the president said, Sessions, leave the room. Why do you have Jeff Sessions leave the room? Because he has already recused himself from any discussion about the campaign-related investigations and Russia. Now enter into this story. You're going to have a conversation about the very topic that you know that your attorney general, Comey's boss, essentially, cannot be a part of. This intimation gets you a little bit more towards that pendulum shift away from the innocent, benign conversation and far more to somebody trying to push their weight around and not just inquire as to what type of person I'm talking to, but whether or not I have a marionette at the end of my strings. I agree with the former guest who talked about the idea that Comey was also feeling him out to see what he was dealing with. But remember, the reason that the FBI does not want to disclose the nature or the ongoing nature of an investigation is because they want to protect the opportunities to gather as much evidence as they need.
Okay, before I get the page in, you want to respond?
Well, I mean, sure. That's a beautiful display of the potential inferences that can be drawn and speculation that can arise as the result of what this meeting is. But that's a far cry from everybody throwing around words like, well, if that's obstruction of justice and is it an impeachable offense and all the rest. Look, I am a lawyer, and because I'm a lawyer, having both prosecuted obstruction cases and defended obstruction cases, obstruction requires proof of corrupt intent. And I got to tell you, without context and without ultimately knowing that behind all of this is credible evidence that there was collusion with regard to the Russians and that it was orchestrated by the White House, this seems to me to be, I hope you can let this go. Again, an intimation. But that's not enough.
The initial question, though, Paige, is if this is true, if the memo is true, is it obstruction of justice? That was my original question.
Well, Don, the memo itself is not obstruction of justice, but Laura is right. It's the context. It's not just the words that the president said. It's how did he say them, where did he say them, and what was the circumstance at the time. So I think if you add in all of the other evidence, everything else that was going on, he asked the Attorney General and the Vice President to step out of the room. The words that he uses, certainly important, but how he says those words, also important. I mean, to have the federal crime of obstruction, corrupt influence, or an attempt to corruptly influence an investigation. That's a very vague standard for a lawyer, for a jury, for a judge. And so I think you can't just look at the words that he said, but you have to consider how he said them.
But according to the New York Times, Comey, one of the reasons he wrote these notes is because he felt the president was pushing him to back off this investigation.
Absolutely. And how it affected Comey, the person who's hearing these words. I mean, it's the subjective impact that it has. Whether you intend to obstruct is important, but the effect that those words have, even more important in a situation like this.
And I'm actually glad, if I can jump in here, I'm glad you said that, Paige, because remember here, we're talking about, this is in conjunction with the testimony of the now acting director of the FBI, who said, and you talked about it earlier in your program, he has not felt that there has been any impediment to the investigation or anyone trying to hinder it in any way. Now, whether that was him raising an eyebrow and being defiant in some way or holding things close to the vest, we do not know. But that fact does undermine the subjective impression that the investigation is being impeded or obstructed. So we need to hear more from Comey, hear more from the FBI, and understand the other contextual clues to determine whether or not we actually do have a true criminal obstruction case. Impeachment, that's for Congress. In the court of law, obstruction is a very high standard, and we are swinging towards that now.
That's got to be the last word. Thank you. I appreciate it. Very interesting conversation. When we come back, much more on the breaking news. Is this President Trump's Watergate?